For the next video in this series, we are going to look at creating a cone. Again, this is more of a beginner exercise, but it's beneficial for anybody regardless of experience level. I have obviously changed to a different color. In this video, we'll be using Createx Illustration Scarlet Red. It's reduced the same as the blue was. It's about 2-to-1, 2 parts paint to 1 part 4011 reducer. My air pressure is still at 30 psi, and I will once again be using my Iwata Eclipse HPCS airbrush to create this cone. The process is very similar to the sphere in that I'm using 2 very loose paper masks to create the cone. Once again, I'll put this up on the screen so that you can take a screenshot and use the same thing if you choose to do so. The only other thing that I've done that is different this time is I created a horizon line with an ink pen on the paper canvas. Most of the time, I would not recommend using an ink pen to draw or sketch anything on your painting surface. Most of the time, I would prefer something that is easily erasable, like a pencil or chalk. I used an ink pen in this demonstration for a very specific reason that we will get into in the next video of this series. So for now, let's jump into creating the cone. Just like the sphere, the first step in this process would be to place our loose paper stencil onto the paper or whatever it is that you might be painting on. I am lining this up so that the curvature at the bottom of the cone lines up well with the horizon line that I drew with the pen. And I'm going to burnish this tape down a little bit better than I did with the sphere so that hopefully I don't knock the tape loose during this process. By taping our loose stencil onto the canvas only on the top, that allows us to hinge this up and view our progress when needed. Just like the sphere, the first thing I'm going to do is put a very light outline of paint around the edges of our cone. Remember to control your shield in order to try and prevent blowing overspray underneath your loose shield, and control the direction of your airbrush to prevent overspray from reaching beyond the edges of our loose shield. Here I'm spraying more or less on the loose paper shield and allowing the paint to travel beyond the shield onto the paper of the canvas. I'm going to swap sides with the airbrush to control the overspray again. We can lift this up to check our progress, and that looks pretty good. We have a very faint paint outline of the outer edges of our cone. From here, we want to pick our light source. I'm going to stick with the same light source we used in the sphere, so the light source is coming from the upper left side, meaning the right side of the cone is going to be darker because it's in shadow. The left side of the cone will be lighter because that's where the light is coming from. But just like the sphere, I want to have a little bit darker edge on the highlight side, on the very outside edge of the cone. We can begin by building the outside edge up. Making it a little bit darker. For the tip, I can use my hand as a little bit of a shield in order to keep some of the highlight on that left side. And I'm primarily pointed straight at what I'm painting at this point. I'm not angling the airbrush to control the overspray. I'm trying to get a defined, darker edge on this right side of our cone. Again, I'm just using lines to darken this up. It's getting pretty dark on our actual loose shield. Let's lift it up and see how dark it is on the canvas. That looks pretty good. And hopefully you can see there is just a little bit of an edge right there at the top where I was using my finger as a shield. So now we'll continue bringing this down towards the center. If you're using an adhesive back mask for this, then you can practice doing lines all the way across the surface. When you're using this loose paper shield, it's a little more difficult to do that because you have to control the shield when the air is hitting it and trying to blow it around. I'm using lines from a little bit farther away. I'm probably 3 inches or so away from the canvas in order to get that nice gradated line. I'm not looking for super sharp, crisp lines like that. I want to pull the airbrush back and create nice, wide, gradated lines. The very bottom of our cone needs to be a little bit darker, but I don't want to make it super dark all the way across. I'm going to leave a little bit of variation in the bottom side, so I'll darken it up right around here. Then I'm going to fade it and let it stay a little bit lighter on this end. Very similar to the secondary reflected highlight we put on the sphere. Going to leave it a little bit lighter down here in this bottom right corner of our cone as well. And you can pull your mask up anytime you like in order to check your progress. That's looking pretty good at this point. Remember to build your layers up very slowly. You don't want to go in and hammer the paint on. You want a nice gradated fade from the shadow into the highlight and back into the shadow on the very left edge. I think I'll go in and work on that left edge now, darkening that up just a little bit. Same process. I'm actually spraying more on the shield than I am on the paper canvas. See how that looks? Notice I left the very top of it a little bit lighter. This is where our highlight is going to be. I probably want to darken that edge up just a hair bit more, but I don't want to get carried away. I want to leave some highlight up here in the very top of the cone. We can add just a little bit more color. Now I'm a lot closer to the canvas, working on smaller lines in order to get this just a little bit darker without covering the entire tip of that cone. That looks pretty good. There's a little bit of a gap there that could be better. We can try to blend that back in. Now I'm going to move back just a little bit farther in order to get that more gradated line and try and blend that area a little bit better. That looks better. Now this is a rounded surface, so even though we have the highlight on this side, there's still going to be a little bit more of a shadow on the left side. So we can start bringing some lines in just to darken this up a little bit more. I don't want to go super dark because you want that gradated fade. It's really dark on the edge and then it's getting lighter as it's coming toward the highlight. That's not bad. We need to work on the shadowed side some more, so we'll add some more paint on that side. Using my finger as a shield again. You can see how nice your hand works, how it creates that very soft edge, but it's pretty sharp at the same time. The reason being is your finger or your hand is not laying flat against the canvas. It has a little bit of a curve coming underneath it, and that allows the paint to travel and blend underneath the curvature of your finger or your hand. And I can blend that in toward what we just created with the finger with just freehand lines. Trying to blend the color out softly at this bottom right corner. Again, what that's doing is it's creating that little bit of a secondary reflected highlight down here. I don't want it to be stark, just a little bit lighter value of this color in this corner. I think I'll darken up the top of this a little bit more. When you begin spraying, when you're using any type of mask or freehand shield, it's always a good idea to begin on the shield itself to make sure your aim is good, make sure your airbrush is working the way that you want it to. It's a good habit to get into, to start on the shield and then bring your strokes onto the surface that you're painting. Using my hand again to protect the highlight at the very tip of our cone. And the rest of this is just creating lines. Very soft lines. I want a soft start and a soft finish. If you have a soft start and a soft finish to all of your lines, it makes it a lot easier to blend different layers of paint together, especially when you're using transparent colors. If you start too heavy and have a dot, that becomes really hard to blend back in unless you just go to full saturation. That looks pretty good. I think we need to darken up the bottom on the left side. I'll do essentially the same thing that we did on the other side here. I'm going to use some lines to darken up the very bottom line of our sphere. We'll get the corner a little bit darker. Blend it up into what we already have. That's looking better. Now I need to start building up a little bit more color on the bottom side of our cone. The highlight mostly will be at the top. So I can start building some of this color down here around the bottom. Again, just creating lines with the airbrush very faintly. Build it up slowly. You can always go darker. It's a lot more difficult to remove the paint when you go too dark. I'm also following the contour of the bottom of our cone as I'm creating these lines. So over here, I'm pretty much at the same angle as the left side of the cone. As I get to the center, I'm more straight up and down. As I move to the right side, then again, I'm following the angle of the right side of our cone shape. I'm softly blending this up, but I'm leaving this area brighter for our highlight. I'm also not trying to go as dark on the highlight side as we have on the shadow side. I just want color in this area. And keep in mind, with a transparent paint, you are going to make things darker. Every time you put more paint onto the surface, it's going to get darker. You can see how dark the shadowed side is compared to the highlight side at this point. As I was creating or redefining the shadow line on this side, that got a little bit darker than it previously was. I'm pretty happy with this so far. I think we need a little bit more color down here on the highlight side. A little bit darker on the very edge. Take a look at that. You can see some of my lines. There's a little bit of streaking in this cone, and that's okay. I think that actually adds to it in my own personal opinion. At this point, I want to begin working on this highlight area. I want to add a little bit more color, some more streaks to kind of define this highlight a little bit better, a little more clearly. The shadowed side could be slightly sharper. I'm doing this freehand. I'm a little bit closer to the surface because I want a more defined line. You can also use your hand or any other shield you choose to use. In fact, you can even use the cutout portion of our stencil very lightly. Define that edge. Now that's a super sharp, crisp edge. That's not the look that I want. So again, I would prefer to use my hand in this case because it gives you that softer edge. Now I'm more centered as far as where the highlight and the shadow is, which is not exactly the look I was going for, but it gives you a demonstration on how you can soften something up if you get too sharp. You can also practice just using freehand strokes to do the same thing and soften that edge just a little bit. Make the outside edge a little bit darker. Dry it with the air. Because once again, as we're adding more and more layers of paint, this is getting darker and darker until the point that it reaches full saturation, which I think we're probably about there for this color. So now I can go back to trying to define where our highlight starts and ends a little bit more up here with just lines. Doing the same thing that we've done to create the rest of this piece. Darken up that very left edge a little bit more. That looks pretty good. I want that darkness on the left edge to be about the same value as the shadow on the right side. Adding some more lines on the bottom side of it, bringing the lines up into our highlighted area, and I'm allowing them to fade before I get to the top. So I'm bringing my lines up probably no further than about right there. Darken up the very bottom of it here just a little bit. But I've kept a little bit of a separation between the dark shadow side and the highlight side right there in the middle. Now at this point you have some options when it comes to really defining that highlight, just like we did with the sphere. You could come in with an eraser, whichever eraser you choose to use, and use that to really define your highlight, or you could easily mix up some opaque white paint and practice using or creating lines with your airbrush and the opaque white paint. I'm going to use the eraser just like we did previously. The difference is, rather than erasing a very small specular circular highlight, we're going to use lines very similar to what we were doing with the airbrush. In order to really bring the brightness of the white paper back out for our highlight. And you can go over this as many times as you like till it's as bright as you want it. Remember, less is more with your highlights. Now I have one traveling at very close to the same angle as that left edge. I'm also going to bring a few strokes down which kind of gives it more of that cone rounded shape. Something else you can do if you have an electric eraser is come in and add just a few little streaks with your electric eraser. The electric eraser is quite a bit more aggressive. It removes paint faster and easier. And I like to use a series of very small dots with an electric eraser to really bring that highlight out. The electric eraser makes it a lot easier to get or more clean defined edge where the highlight and the shadow meet as well. The downside to having that sharp defined line where the transition is between the highlight and the shadowed side is it's a little too crisp. It looks almost like there's a point, like we're creating a triangle as opposed to a cone. So to fix that, I need to soften up that edge a little bit more. So with the airbrush and my finger once again, I'm going to try to soften that transition. Also need to add a little bit of a shadow on this bottom left edge that would be cast from our sphere. So I can darken this corner up a little bit more. That looks better. As far as the shadow being cast from the sphere, remember to try and keep that in a little bit of a rounded shape. It's not a super dark shadow because we are not using any other color except for this illustration scarlet red. The transition between the shadow and the highlight looks better now, in my opinion. It's a much softer transition. I would still prefer for it to be a little bit farther to the right side than it wound up, but because I had to repair that area, it got pushed over. I did a pretty good job of controlling the overspray from blowing up underneath the mask. There is a slight bit of overspray down here. Again, these are all things that I want you to practice. It is very hard to control the overspray from blowing up underneath a very loose paper mask like we're using. Again, you can come back in with an eraser and erase some of this overspray to clean that up. At this point, we can take our cutout portion of our loose paper shield and tape it up here, and then we can work on the shadow. Just like the shadow before, we were creating a round object, so we created a round shaped shadow. This time we were painting a cone. So the shadow is going to resemble a little bit of a cone shape. It's still going to be very round and very soft. Again, I'm starting on the mask and dragging paint off using dagger strokes. Very soft dagger strokes. This is another place where having those really soft lines helps you to blend this out into nothing. Whereas if you have a dot at the end of your line, it's not going to look as well. So really concentrate on creating those soft lines, soft on both ends of your line. Remember, build it up slow. Right now I'm just drying the paint with air from the airbrush alone. See how that looks? I think that's pretty good. And here's the final result. Once again, you can see that secondary reflected highlight we created down in the bottom corner of our cone really helps to differentiate where the cone actually is compared to the shadow being cast by the cone. That's a great trick when you're using a single color to paint an object. Once again, this is an excellent way to really practice your lines as well as some daggers while you're actually creating something that you can look at and judge your progress from. It's a lot more rewarding, it's a lot more enjoyable to practice like this compared to painting just pages of lines and dagger strokes, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, creating pages of lines and dagger strokes are good exercises that will absolutely help you improve. This is just a more enjoyable way of practicing, and it gives you, again, something to actually look at. You can see where you need to improve and focus your practice time on. I'll leave a link in the description below to our friends over at Spray Gunner. Spray Gunner is where I get all of my Createx paint. They have fantastic customer service. Their shipping is always super fast, and their prices are very reasonable in comparison with all of the other dealers out there. I'll also leave a link to the Iwata HPCS Eclipse airbrush that I was using in this video. That is my go-to airbrush. It's my workhorse. I use it for probably 90 to 95% of what I do. It's a great airbrush for beginners as well as seasoned artists. I hope everything in this video made sense. I hope you got something out of this. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, and share. The next video, we're going to look at some of the differences between transparent and opaque paint. You may have noticed that using a transparent, you can still clearly see that horizon line that I drew onto the paper canvas before I began painting. A transparent paint will not cover that up. Till next time, I'm Trevor with Wicked Art Studio. I will see you all then.